Have you ever felt utterly dismissed, your dreams and passions belittled by the very person who should have been your greatest supporter? Imagine standing in a room, the weight of years of silent disapproval pressing down on you, as your own father declares you unworthy. It stings, doesn't it? If you believe that kindness matters, if you believe that what goes around comes around, then hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because this is for everyone who's ever been told they weren't enough. I know you're a good person, and that's why you're here. So please, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and drop a comment with the name of your city. Let's begin. The wind howled outside, mirroring the turmoil within the grand, old house. Rain lashed against the windows, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the fragile composure I was desperately trying to maintain. Congratulations, Damien. My father, Alistair announced, his voice booming through the room. He presented my younger brother with an expensively thick envelope. Everything you've worked for, it's all yours. The estate, the company, the accounts. You've earned it, son. I sat across the vast, polished table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to still their trembling. Damien avoided my gaze, his jaw tight. My mother, Eleanor, busied herself with the clasp of her pearl necklace, a picture of studied indifference. Finally, Alistair turned his attention to me. "And you, Alana," he said, his tone laced with disdain. "You've always been a disappointment. Lost in your own world, too sensitive, too impractical." His words, each one a carefully aimed dart, found their mark. It was as if I'd become invisible. There were 5 of us in that room. Alistair, Damien, Eleanor, the family lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, and myself, yet I felt utterly unseen. Alistair didn't hesitate as he slid a stack of papers towards Mr. Caldwell. "Let's get this over with," he commanded. "Dad, please," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "Don't do this." My plea was met with a scoff. "Spare me the dramatics, Alana. You're not a child anymore. You made your choices. You walked away from the family business, remember? You said you wanted to make a difference." He used air quotes, his expression mocking. "You ran off to help the needy. And what did it get you? Nothing. No money, no success, just wasted years." "You never asked why I left," I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. "And you still don't care," he retorted, his voice sharp. "Because this is the real world, not one of your idealistic fantasies. Your brother stayed. He worked hard. He showed me loyalty." "He lied to you," I countered. "You just didn't want to see it." My father's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Is that jealousy I hear?" The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, an older man with a kind face, seemed increasingly uncomfortable. His fingers tightened on the folder he held, and I noticed beads of sweat forming on his brow. I think," he began hesitantly, "before any signatures are made, there's something you should be aware of." Alistair's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Caldwell?" Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat and adjusted the papers. "There's an amendment to the will. It was added some years ago, but it was sealed, as per the request of your late wife, Alana's grandmother, Serafina." Serafina. Just the mention of her name brought a wave of warmth amidst the icy atmosphere. She was the only one who had truly understood me, the only one who used to say that my quiet strength was more powerful than any shouting. "What amendment?" Alistair demanded, his voice now laced with irritation. Mr. Caldwell opened the folder and extracted a yellow document. This was added discreetly after Serafina's final meeting with the notary. It was her express wish that this only be revealed if you chose to disinherit Alana. Alistair's face twitched in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. She had no right." The lawyer's voice was firm. "Actually, she did. Your wife owned 51% of the shares in the family's main holding company before she passed. You never contested it, Alistair. This clause is legally binding." Damien shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Eleanor froze, her hand still resting on her pearls. Mr. Caldwell turned to me. "Miss Alana, would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to do the honors?" I didn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the envelope in Damien's hand, the one that held everything Alistair thought he controlled. Read it, I said quietly. The lawyer unfolded the paper and began to read. In the event that my granddaughter, Alana, is deemed unworthy by her father, I hereby grant her full authority over my share of the company to be executed immediately. All voting rights are to be transferred to her name. This shall override any previous distribution as it pertains to control and decision-making within the estate and company. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the gentler rhythm of the rain against the windows. It was as if even the storm outside was holding its breath, listening. What the hell does this mean? Alistair growled. It means, Mr. Caldwell said, glancing in my direction, that your daughter is now the majority shareholder. And nothing you sign today can change that. Alistair stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. This is nonsense. She doesn't even understand the business. Maybe not your version of it, I said, finally rising to my feet. But I know how to lead. I know how to protect people. I know how to build without crushing others. And I know how to be the kind of person Grandma Serafina would have been proud of. His face twisted, disbelief morphing into rage, then into a flicker of something akin to confusion. This can't be. She can't. I took a step forward, my voice steady and firm. You said I was useless. That I brought nothing to the table. But the truth is, I just never needed to prove myself to you. With that, I turned to Mr. Caldwell. Let's continue, Mr. Caldwell. We have work to do. Damien lowered his eyes, the color draining from his face. Eleanor's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she remained silent. Alistair didn't sit down. He didn't speak. He just stood there, frozen in place, as the world he thought he controlled shifted beneath his feet. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Alistair remained standing, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. I could see a muscle ticking in his jaw, and his knuckles were white where he gripped the back of the chair he'd pushed away. And for the first time in my life, I saw something I had never expected to see in my father's eyes. Fear. It wasn't the roaring, explosive anger I was accustomed to. It was something quieter, more unsettling. He didn't yell, didn't scream, but that somehow made it worse. That profound silence wasn't acceptance. It was disbelief. He was a man watching his world crumble, all because he was too busy looking down on others to see the strength that was growing around him. Please sit down, I said to him. And I meant it. There was no malice in my voice, no hint of triumph. Because no matter what he had done, I wasn't him. I wasn't going to stoop to his level. I wasn't there to humiliate anyone. All I wanted was what I had always been denied. Dignity. He didn't move. Instead, Damien spoke up, his voice tight. Wait a minute. This isn't fair. She left. She didn't want anything to do with the business. She ran off to teach or rescue animals or whatever it was. I volunteered at shelters and helped fund housing for women. I corrected him, my voice still calm. I didn't run away, Damien. I found my purpose. Not everyone needs a boardroom to make a difference. That's noble and all, Damien muttered, still clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline, but you don't know anything about running the company. I know enough to know you've been cooking the books and funneling funds into a side corporation under your friend's name, I said steadily. Damien's eyes widened in alarm. Alana. Eleanor gasped, her voice finally breaking the silence. That's enough. This is family. We don't need to tear each other apart. Oh, now it's family? I asked, my voice cracking just slightly. Was it family when you stayed silent as he called me a burden? When he gave everything to Damien without a word of thanks for what I gave up to keep this family from falling apart behind the scenes? You were never meant for this world, Eleanor whispered, her gaze distant. I know, I nodded. You all made that very clear. But Grandma Serafina thought differently. The lawyer cleared his throat. If I may, Miss Alana, the shares weren't her only bequest. She left you something else. Something she asked to be delivered only after this moment. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, weathered wooden box. When he opened it, I saw an old, gold-plated compass inside. It was the kind my grandmother used to keep on her bookshelf. She'd always said it helped her find her way when she felt lost. Underneath the compass was a folded letter, my name written in her delicate, familiar handwriting. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Alana," it began. "If you're reading this, then your father has done exactly what I feared. But don't hate him. He is a product of a world that taught him power is louder than love. You, my sweet girl, you were never weak. You were the quiet strength that held us together. This compass is for you, because your path is your own now, and no matter what anyone says, I trust you to lead." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I looked at Mr. Caldwell. "Let's proceed." He handed me the folder with the documents, the ones Alistair had prepared to erase me. But they were meaningless now. As I signed the acknowledgement of my controlling stake in the company, Alistair finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "You think this makes you powerful," he said. "You think Serafina gave you the upper hand out of love?" "She did it to spite me," he said, his voice thick with bitterness. I looked him directly in the eyes, finally seeing the vulnerable man beneath the harsh exterior. "No," I replied, my voice firm but gentle. "She did it because she believed in me, because she knew I'd use this power to heal, not to hurt." Then I turned and walked out of that room, my head held high. It felt as if the weight of years of rejection was slowly peeling away from my shoulders, like old, rusted armor finally giving way. But what awaited me outside that door wasn't peace. It was war. Because power, it turns out, comes with its own set of battles, and Alistair wasn't done trying to reclaim what he thought was rightfully his. I barely made it down the long corridor before I felt the walls closing in. My legs carried me forward, one step after another, but inside, I was unraveling. Not from regret, but from a strange sense of release. It wasn't revenge I was feeling, it was liberation. Years of silence, years of tiptoeing around, trying to earn a flicker of approval from a man who looked at me like I was a stain on his perfect legacy. All of that was finally starting to fade. For once, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was the one holding the compass. Outside the grand estate, the gray sky had broken into a soft, persistent drizzle. I stood alone beneath it, letting the cold rain soak through my blazer. Each drop felt like it was washing away another layer of the burden I'd carried for so long. Then, I heard the heavy front door open behind me. "Alana," Damien called out. I turned to face him. He wasn't outwardly angry. Not yet, but his eyes held that familiar gleam, the one I used to dread. It was the look that warned me he was about to transform into someone else, someone calculating, someone ruthless. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice deceptively reasonable. "Do what, Damien?" "Push me out," he said with a shrug. "Come on, we both know that's your next move." "I haven't made any moves, Damien. All I did was stand up for myself." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're not a threat to me, Alana. You think signing a piece of paper makes you powerful? You don't have the spine for leadership." My heart pounded in my chest, but I refused to flinch. "I'm not here to prove anything to you," I said softly. "I'm here to lead with integrity. Something this family seems to have forgotten." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "I give you 2 months before you come crawling back. The company's not a charity, it's a battlefield." "No," I corrected him, raising my chin. "It's a chance, a platform, and I'll use it to build, not to break." "You really are naive," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. And then, he turned and walked away. But something about the way he moved, the way his hands remained clenched, the look in his eyes, it all told me this wasn't the end of his resistance. It was only the beginning. The next few days unfolded like a gathering storm. News spread quickly through the company. Employees whispered my name in the hallways, as if I were some ghost returned from exile. Some looked relieved, others afraid. I didn't make any drastic changes at first. I wasn't there to fire everyone and redecorate the office in my own personal style. My priority was to listen, to understand the complex system my father had built from the inside out. And what I discovered was that it wasn't just flawed, In many ways, it was deeply cruel. Departments were pitted against each other, promotions were granted through favoritism, and employee burnout was swept under the rug with expensive solutions. My father hadn't been running a company. He'd been presiding over a throne room, and Damien had been a diligent student at his feet. One afternoon, I walked into the staff break room. The employees froze, as if I'd interrupted a secret meeting. "Please," I said, raising a hand to reassure them. "Sit down, eat your lunch. You're on your break." One woman, a kind-faced janitor named Rosa, stood up slowly. "We were told not to sit when Mr. Damien entered," she explained quietly. I blinked in surprise. "Well, that changes today." Rosa looked stunned, then a flicker of gratitude crossed her face. That evening, I stayed late in my office, meticulously reviewing the department reports, combing through files that Damien had tried to bury. I uncovered 3 misappropriated budgets, an entire side deal with a questionable supplier, and a list of terminated employees who had dared to speak up against the company's practices. It wasn't just simple greed. The rot ran much deeper than that. And I knew that if I didn't act decisively and quickly, I'd be the one they blamed when the whole structure inevitably came crashing down. The next morning, Damien made his move. He stormed into my office, a thick folder in his hand and a wicked grin plastered across his face. "You want to play CEO?" he snapped. "Let's see how you handle a PR nightmare." He threw the folder onto my desk. Inside were photos, emails, and doctored screenshots. "Are you serious?" I asked, flipping through the fabricated evidence. "You fabricated all of this?" "Can you prove I did?" he countered smugly. "You really want to destroy me this badly?" "I want what's mine," he snarled. "You were never meant to win." I stood up, placing my palms flat on the desk, meeting his gaze. "I don't want to win, Damien," I said calmly. "I want to heal what you broke. This company has the potential to change lives, but you only see it as a weapon." "I see it as power," he corrected me, "and I don't intend to lose it." Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding. I'd underestimated him. This wasn't just a sibling rivalry, it was a war for the very soul of our legacy. But I had one weapon he didn't: the truth and the courage to wield it with kindness. The storm hit with a ferocity that took me by surprise. Within 48 hours of Damien's visit, headlines began to flood the news. New CEO tied to charity embezzlement. Family feud exposes ugly secrets behind legacy corporation. Is Alana Gray qualified or just a puppet with a silver spoon? It didn't matter that the evidence was clearly doctored. The court of public opinion doesn't wait for facts. My inbox overflowed with scathing PR emails. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from angry shareholders, and some employees avoided eye contact while others whispered behind my back when I passed. I'd barely begun to settle into my new role, and already I was bleeding credibility. At first, I tried to remain calm, to tell myself that the truth would eventually prevail. But late one night, sitting alone in the darkened office, the weight of it all finally broke me. I locked the door, curled up in the corner of the couch, and let the tears come, ugly, silent sobs that seemed to choke me from the inside out. I wasn't just crying because they didn't believe me. I was crying because a treacherous doubt had begun to creep into my own mind. Maybe Alistair had been right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this world after all. Then I heard a soft knock at the door. I quickly wiped my face, trying to regain some composure. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Rosa, the janitor, peeked in. She hesitated, holding a small paper cup of hot chocolate. "I thought you could use this." I managed a weak smile. "You didn't have to. You looked like you needed it," she said gently, stepping inside and handing me the warm cup. No one ever brought me anything when I cried in this room, so I figured maybe someone should break the cycle. Something inside me cracked again, but this time in a different way, a softer, more vulnerable way. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She sat down across from me, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you want to know the truth about your family, Miss Alana?" I looked up, surprised. Rosa nodded. "I've worked here for 28 years. I've seen more than most." I saw how your father treated people, how Damien smiled at people when they were useful and forgot them the second they weren't. But you..." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "You always looked me in the eye." I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. "You may feel alone now," she continued, her voice low and steady, "but you've got something they'll never have. Loyalty earned through kindness." I blinked rapidly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "Why are you helping me, Rosa?" "Because someone once helped me when no one else did," she said with a small, knowing smile. "And because this company doesn't need another king, it needs a healer." The next morning, I walked into the board meeting with a newfound fire in my spine and the unassailable truth in my hands. I let them shout first, the accusations, the doubts, the demands for my resignation. One particularly aggressive shareholder even threatened a lawsuit. When they finally ran out of steam, I stood up and said calmly, "If anyone here can definitively prove those documents are real, I'll step down today." Silence fell over the room. I dropped the original reports onto the table, the ones that clearly showed Damien's misappropriated funds, his secret side company, and the hush money he'd paid to silence whistleblowers. Then I turned on the projector. A video played, captured by the security cameras 3 weeks prior. It showed Damien walking into an office he'd claimed he'd never been in, plugging in a USB drive, and transferring files. The timestamp on the video precisely matched the moment the fake documents were created. The room was utterly quiet. "Truth matters," I said softly, my voice resonating with conviction. "But I didn't come here to destroy my brother. I came to fix what he broke." I turned to the lead lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, sitting at the end of the table. "My grandmother gave me this position not because I was perfect, but because I still believe in people, even the ones who hurt me. So, I'm not pressing charges. I'm not suing Damien. But he is suspended indefinitely, and a full internal investigation will move forward." Some jaws dropped in astonishment, while others nodded in grudging respect. One man, Mr. Halpern, a retired board member, stood up slowly. "I doubted you," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were just another soft-spoken idealist. But today, you reminded me why we started this company in the first place." His voice cracked slightly. It wasn't about power, it was about people. And with that, the tide began to turn. Damien didn't show up the next day, or the day after that. But a few days later, I received a letter, handwritten and unsigned. "Alana, I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't just want power, I wanted to be seen. I always thought you got the love I never did, but maybe you just earned it in a way I didn't understand. I hope someday." I folded the letter and placed it beside my grandmother's compass. Not every ending needed to be violent or dramatic. Some endings were whispered, and some beginnings were born from grace. The office felt different now. Not colder, not quieter, but more awake. A month had passed since the board meeting, and although the storm hadn't completely cleared, the clouds had parted just enough to allow sunlight to filter through. The fake allegations had been publicly retracted, and though some media outlets tried to spin it as a lucky break, those who truly mattered were beginning to see through the noise. Not because I'd fought back with aggression, but because I'd held the line with unwavering integrity. Still, there was one person I hadn't heard from: my father. He had vanished after that fateful day in the conference room. No calls, no emails, not even a lawyer reaching out on his behalf. Part of me assumed he'd retreated to lick his wounds, to live out his days blaming everyone but himself for his circumstances. But then, one quiet Sunday morning, I walked into my office to find him sitting in the chair across from my desk, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes hollow. "I had to see it with my own eyes," he said, his voice raspy. "See what?" I asked, my voice cautious. "That you didn't burn the place down." He said nothing for a moment, his gaze sweeping around my office, taking in the changes I'd made. The brighter, more welcoming atmosphere, the artwork on the walls that showcased the company's commitment to community projects. He looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen him. The usual arrogance that defined his posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump. For the first time in my life, He didn't look like a man who owned a room. He looked like a man who had lost something precious. "You were right," he said softly, his voice rough around the edges. "About me, about Damien, about how this place stopped being about people." I remained silent, watching him carefully. I still didn't know whether to fully trust his words. "Not yet," I replied. "Why now? Why come back at all?" He paused, then reached inside his coat and pulled out a faded photograph. It was a picture of me and Grandma Serafina. I was maybe 12 years old, covered in paint, holding up a rather terrible drawing of a bird. She was laughing, her face radiating pure joy. "She always said you were going to change this family," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just never wanted to believe it. Because if you did, then it meant I'd failed." "You didn't fail," I said quietly, my voice gentle. "You just built the wrong way." He looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting nervously. "I came today because I need to say something. Something I've never said before." He raised his eyes to meet mine, and I saw a raw vulnerability there. Pain, shame, regret. "I'm sorry, Alana. For everything." I held his gaze, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me. Part of me wanted to reject his apology, to tell him it was too little, too late. But deep down, I knew something profound. Hurt people, and healing only truly begins when someone chooses to break that destructive cycle. So I nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. "Thank you," I whispered. He stood up to leave, hesitating at the door, as if there was something more he wanted to say. "I don't expect anything from you," he said, his voice low. "I just needed to say it before I ran out of time." "Don't run out of time," I urged him softly. "Fix what you can. It's not too late to change." He didn't speak again, just gave me one last, long look, a look that held a flicker of hope and a profound sadness, before he slipped out the door and was gone. 2 weeks later, Rosa came into my office with a thick folder. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a list of every employee your father let go over the years for speaking up," she explained. "I thought you might want to do something about it." I opened the file and began to read each name, each story of talent and dedication silenced by fear and intimidation. And then, we sent letters to each and every one of them, inviting them back to the company. No questions asked. It wasn't about proving a point or wielding my newfound power. It was about demonstrating that legacy isn't defined by bloodlines or wealth, but by the way you make people feel when you walk away. Months passed, and the company underwent a transformation. It wasn't about superficial changes, a fresh coat of paint or a new logo. It was a fundamental shift in its culture, a move towards empathy, transparency, and collaboration. The atmosphere became warmer, more vibrant, filled with a sense of shared purpose. Damien never officially returned, but we did meet once, over coffee. We didn't dwell on the past or rehash old wounds. Instead, we talked, two siblings trying to understand each other, to find common ground, and perhaps, to rebuild a fractured bond. My father maintained his distance, but one day, I received an anonymous donation receipt in the mail, a substantial 7-figure sum made in my name to the women's shelter, where I used to volunteer. There was no note, no signature, just his quiet, imperfect way of trying to be better. And in that gesture, I found a measure of peace. Because in the end, I didn't seek revenge. I gained something far more valuable: respect, inner peace, and a future that no one could ever take away. And when I walk into that boardroom now, I don't hear whispers of doubt or fear. I hear the sound of footsteps behind me, the footsteps of people who trust me, who believe in my vision, and who are ready to follow me to build something truly meaningful. All of this because one day, a man said, "You're a useless child." The transformation of the company wasn't without its challenges. There was resistance, of course. Some of the older guard, those who had thrived under Alistair's regime, struggled to adapt to the new culture of openness and collaboration. They missed the old hierarchy, the clear lines of power, the sense of ruthless competition. I understood their discomfort, but I remained firm. We weren't going back to the old ways. We were building something better, something sustainable, something that valued people over profit. One particularly stubborn department head, Mr. Harrison, consistently undermined my initiatives. He'd openly criticize my decisions in meetings, foster dissent among his team, and subtly sabotage collaborative projects. I knew I had to address the situation, but I wanted to do it thoughtfully, not with the same heavy-handedness that Alistair would have employed. I invited Mr. Harrison to my office for a private conversation. I listened patiently to his concerns, acknowledging his experience and the value of his contributions to the company over the years. But I also made it clear that the culture was changing and that everyone, regardless of their tenure or position, was expected to embrace the new values. Instead of reprimanding him, I offered him a choice. He could either be a part of the change, a mentor and guide for his team in this new environment, or he could step down with a generous severance package and my sincere gratitude for his past service. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. And to my surprise, Mr. Harrison chose to stay. He slowly began to adapt, to embrace the collaborative spirit, and even became a valuable advocate for the new culture within his department. It taught me a powerful lesson, that even the most resistant hearts can be won over with patience, empathy, and a genuine commitment to positive change. Meanwhile, my relationship with Damien continued to evolve. Our coffee meetings became more frequent, more relaxed. We started to talk about things beyond the company, our childhood memories, our dreams, our fears. I learned about his insecurities, the pressure he felt to live up to Alistair's expectations, the loneliness he often experienced despite his outward confidence. He, in turn, began to see me not just as a sister, but as a leader, a confidant, and a friend. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Not yet, but it was a start. A fragile bridge being built across years of misunderstanding and resentment. Alistair's transformation was more subtle, but equally profound. The 7-figure donation to the women's shelter was just the beginning. He started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, quietly serving meals to the homeless. He established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in business. He even began attending family dinners again, his presence no longer dominating the conversation, but rather adding a quiet, reflective depth. It was as if the years of ruthless ambition had finally given way to a yearning for connection, for redemption, for a chance to leave a positive mark on the world. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I found Alistair waiting for me in the lobby. He looked hesitant, almost shy. I wanted to show you something, he said, his voice a little rough. He led me outside to the company's courtyard, a space that had once been a sterile, neglected patch of concrete. Now it was a vibrant garden filled with flowers, trees, and a small, bubbling fountain. Employees sat on benches during their breaks, enjoying the fresh air and the peaceful atmosphere. I planted it, Alistair said simply, gesturing around the garden. I wanted to create a space where people could breathe. I was speechless. This wasn't the Alistair I had known for most of my life. This was a man who was learning to nurture, to create beauty, to give back. It was a powerful reminder that change is always possible, that even the most hardened hearts can soften, that healing can blossom in the most unexpected places. Years passed, and the company flourished. Not just in terms of profits, but in terms of its impact on the community, its commitment to ethical practices, and its dedication to its employees' well-being. We became known not just for our success, but for our integrity. And I, in turn, grew as a leader. I learned to balance strength with compassion, to make difficult decisions with empathy, and to inspire others not through fear, but through trust and respect. Looking back on that stormy day in the conference room, I realized that my father's words, though painful, had ultimately become a catalyst for my own growth. They had forced me to confront my own doubts, to discover my inner strength, and to forge my own path. And in the end, I didn't just inherit a company. I inherited the opportunity to create a legacy of kindness, a legacy that would endure long after I was gone. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. That true success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the positive impact we have on the world around us. That even in the face of adversity, Even when we're told we're not enough, we have the power to rise above, to heal, and to build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive.